Welcome back. The sport, the game we love, is only 3 days away, and that is magnificent news. To get in the spirit, I thought I'd put on a very nice football shirt, if I may say myself. And I've got a lot today for you. I've got Arsenal and Spurs assets I'm bullish on. I've got pretty much all the mids covered aside from the premiums, and I've got the premium defenders covered. So please do consider subscribing, like the video if you enjoy, and let's get into it. We will start with one of the most important topics in FPL this year, especially given the changes to the bonus structure, and that is the premium defenders. I've got three categories here for the premiums: the City ones, or the City one, the Liverpool one, and the Arsenal assets. First, we're going to look at Gvardiol because he has the highest predicted points from the Fantasy Football Hub AI tool. So I thought it'd be best to start with him. There are two things that we really need to understand about him to essentially assess how good of an asset he is. Number one, his role this year, and that's probably the most important. And number two, how do we interpret his fixture difficulty? Okay, let's look at his role and what it could potentially be this season. So towards the back end of last year, for quite a while, he played this unicorn type of role, right? It had never been seen before. It was a hybrid left back, left center back at times, left wing role, and thus he generated a lot of output. He was able to interact with the left winger, have many combinations with him, get into advanced areas, and get into areas he could shoot, cross, and penetrate from often, right? That's point one. Now, the reasoning for this was that prior to this system that Guardiola had stumbled upon, he had Walker high and wide and Foden coming inside from the right wing to play as an 8 when City the ball. However, this made them even more susceptible to transitions than they already were because they had numerical disadvantages at the back and what I would say is a spatial disadvantage in terms of the fact that there was just so much space between the defensive line and the 8s because you only really had Rodri sitting with maybe someone else playing the left 8 quite close to Haaland and Foden. Maybe that was Alvarez at times. So, with that in mind, Guardiola tweaked it. He gave Gvardiol attacking responsibility, took it away from the left winger, and thus could put a more defensive-minded player on the side, or tweak his system just for it to be more defensively orientated. This year, I don't think he's going to do the same. The Community Shield was a good insight into how he's potentially thinking. Gvardiol didn't just occupy left centre-back roles when City were on the ball and formed a 3. He did get into some advanced areas, but it wasn't at the same frequency he did last year, nor was it in the same manner and the same amount of threatening positions. Thus, I think we'll see a via media between going very defensive and very attacking like he was last year. I think one thing it will depend on is the combination of 8/10s in the middle. When it's Foden and De Bruyne, I can imagine him holding back a bit more, given Guardiola will just give them the responsibility, lean on their quality, let them leverage their quality to essentially create for City. And in the games where KDB doesn't play, yeah, sure, I think maybe you have someone else in the 8, Bernardo, Kovacic, etc., who is slightly better defensively. You can give them more responsibility in those areas, thus allowing Gvardiol to push forward. The other thing is I think he'll trust his left winger a bit more this time. Now that he's got, on the whole, 4 wingers, I would say, but specifically on the left, Grealish and Doku, I think he'll just give them more responsibility. You've seen his comments about Grealish this preseason, and they've been quite positive. So with that in mind, I can't imagine him essentially abandoning a left winger, an out-and-out left winger for the entire game. So I'm expecting a reduction in his output. That's point one. The second point is I don't think his fixtures are as good as people are making out to be. Chelsea away, for all the issues, will never be an easy fixture. There's so much talent in the squad, especially with the signing of Neto. You've got Nkunku, Palmer, Neto, Jackson if he's fit. But even if not, you've still got a lot whereby I don't think you can say that it's a probable outcome for City to keep a clean. Sure, Ipswich in game week 2, great. I have no real problems with that. But after that, I think it's really tough. You've got West Ham away, Fulkrug, Antonio, Kudus, Bowen, Paqueta, Somerville, etc., right? That's not easy. That is a lot of firepower to contain, especially when you're away from home. And statistically speaking, goals go up for the home side 10% compared to when they are away. So that's a lot to deal with. Brentford, they have after that, and that's always been a little bit of a tricky fixture for them. One that's difficult to interpret for a variety of reasons. So I don't think you can call that necessarily an easy clean sheet game either. And then again, we have to factor in that the output level won't be the same as last year, or at least it's unlikely to be so. Okay. Then it's Arsenal and Newcastle. So those are pretty tough fixtures. I actually think from a defensive standpoint, attacking, I have a completely different view. But from a defensive standpoint, I think they're pretty difficult. Now, given he's 6 million and you have Gabriel at 6 million, I just don't understand how you can justify him. And when I get onto Gabriel, you will see why I am so bullish. But before that, let's look at Trent Alexander-Arnold. Now, this for me is probably the most difficult one to interpret. The only thing that's really putting me off is his price. Even if he was 0.5 cheaper, I think I'd still have a flirt with it. But as of now, I'm kind of just staying away. Overall, you are going to have to bet against one of the big boys, whether that be City, whether that be Liverpool, Arsenal, or maybe some of the premium assets in Son and Palmer. You're going to have to get rid of a few at least, just given how well FPL have priced the game. So for me, right now, and I'll talk about this tomorrow a bit more when I go into Liverpool, I'm going, well, essentially away from Liverpool and thus away from Trent. The fixtures are really good. I have no real quarrels with that. I don't think they can be interpreted in the same way that I did Gvardiol's. It's literally just his price. The other thing, similar to Gvardiol, is I think potentially you see a slight reduction in his output. If he is to play slightly more central, right, it reduces and limits his angles. What I mean by that is if you see a traditional Trent performance under Klopp, sure, maybe they'll play 3 on the ball and he would invert, but he would still be able to find himself on those slightly wider right areas and use his crossing ability and leverage that to generate assists for himself. However, from more central areas, given he's right-footed and he's playing on the right side, if you just envisage yourself trying to hit those type of passes, the angle's slightly more closed off, and potentially maybe you have to open your body up a bit more. Potentially you have to use the left foot, which obviously you won't be as strong as. And just these small things I don't think are going to help him. Also, the fact that when he was creating last time, he was creating mainly for the front three. But now that you have the 8 slightly more advanced and closer to the wingers, that cluster there, I think, will just take away from everyone's output and it'll be slightly more spread in general. Because before under Klopp, it was the front three, Trent, Robbo in an earlier iteration, and that's about it. But now you have the front three, you also have the 8, and then the fullbacks are a bit more narrow and probably have slightly less responsibility output-wise than they did previously. So that's another thing to factor in. And with those 2 factors, price and a slight reduction in output, in my opinion, I'm just not sure I can justify it when I have the likes of Gabriel and Porro at 1.5 cheaper, and they've got a lot going for them. Now, if you've watched any of my content recently, if you've read any of my content recently, you will know that I am super bullish on Arsenal, and nothing about that has changed. Why? Well, they are the best defense in the league. I don't think you can question that. You look at last year's results, you look at how they've strengthened in the signing of Calafiori, you look how good Zinchenko's been preseason, for the fact that Saliba's getting, well, he's still pretty young, right? So he's getting older and improving at an exponential rate. Gabriel has been magnificent and almost removed his error-prone status entirely. White had a fantastic season last year. Rice is only getting better, etc., right? Then you look at the fact that they are the best set-piece taking team in the league by a mile. And the other thing, I don't think the fixtures are that bad. Wolves at home, Brighton at home. Going to the Emirates, I think, is very, very tough. To score against them, I think you need 1 of 3 things to happen. Either you must do something magnificent, you must get quite lucky, or they must make a mistake, Arsenal. All of those, I would say, are improbable outcomes. And given that, I really wouldn't be surprised to see them rack up a lot of clean sheets, like they did last year, but to an even greater extent. We've seen iterations in Arteta's system. I think they've overall just made the side better. I think he's optimizing the left side better. And just given they're able to sustain attacks a little bit more as a result and have a bit more territorial dominance, I can see that offsetting some of the pressure that Arsenal's defense will face. Going back to the fixtures, yes, Villa away, Spurs away are 2 difficult fixtures in the first 4 for a defense. Agreed. But they're less difficult for Arsenal than they are for everyone else because Arsenal are the best defense in the league. And honestly, these guys on their day can lock up anyone. The reason I'm so bullish on Gabriel is, even if the fixture is difficult, I get the biggest threat from set pieces in the league, in my opinion. And I get that 7-8 times a game. They'll generate enough free kicks and corners whereby it's at least 7-8 times a game. I'm very comfortable having that. He could score a lot of goals this season. I almost think it could become some sort of a revelation. You have the biggest threat in the air, and he's combining himself with arguably some of the best set piece takers in the league. That's a really, really dangerous combo. And it's not just him. Because if they just had to deal with just him, then fair enough. But he'll be able to find space because you have to deal with the likes of Saliba and Havertz, etc., etc. So for me, at 6 million, the upside that you're getting And the floor you're getting, I think you can't find this anywhere else, literally anywhere else, for anything close to this price point. I would say that because I think you can find it in Haaland, but that's about it. So for me, I don't see any weaknesses with Gabriel. The reason I haven't gone Saliba is because Gabriel's a bigger threat in the air. I think he's nailed as well. I mean, in terms of that left centre-back channel, sure, Calafiori looks to be a brilliant player, but I think he'll invert and start from left back. I don't think he's taking Gabriel's role. It's a bit of an unnecessary risk at this point, at least. And White, I think I personally just see him playing a little bit more defensively with a slightly different dynamic to Arsenal, where Odegaard maybe drops a little bit deep. So to conclude, I would have Gabriel top by a mile. I'd probably then have Saliba. After that, I would have Trent. I know I said he's a million extra, but I'm still expecting him to do well. It's not that I'm not expecting that. It's just I'm not expecting him to maybe justify his 7 million price tag over Gabriel at 6 and Porro at 5.5. I think Gvardiol I would definitely have at the bottom. White, I'm just not interested in at 6.5. I think if he's slightly more defensive, you may as well take Gabriel or Saliba for 0.5 left. Before we get into the midfielders, this is my co-star showing off the brilliant Fantasy Football Hub app. This will help you actually win your mini leagues and actually beat your friends. It will help you in so many ways. You've got the My Team AI tool, a non-biased source that you can always refer to any time in the day, and it will always be there for you. You get tips from some of the best around. Imagine getting to see Ben Crellin, one of the greatest managers of all time. Imagine getting to see his team every week. And that too at a price that represents brilliant value for money. And there's so much more, including points predictions, statistics tables, fixture tables. So with that in mind, I would strongly recommend that if you would like to win this year, get in on what everyone else is on already. Don't let them have the advantage. Check out the link in the description. It's 50% off right now, and that is expiring soon, so take action. But not only that, you get your money back if you don't win your mini league. So really, it's a free shot of victory, and you're going to have a lot of fun just with the general user experience within the app. So I would strongly recommend it. Check out the link in the description. Very easy to access, super simple sign-up process. And with that being said, let's hop into the midfielders. Now, I am well aware that there is a lot to digest here. Even for myself making this, I was like, okay, this is going to be a lot to digest. So I'm going to take it pretty slow. I'm going to take it one at a time. I'm going to have to refer to the slides, and we'll essentially go through it. One of the biggest categories that we need to essentially nail to be successful this year is the mid-price mids. Just given how the game is structured, it's pretty difficult to have so many premiums whereby you can just find the good cheap alternatives that there always are, e.g. Palmer, and play a very template game. There are so many good options, as you can see, that you're going to have to nail the right ones. So how do we go about doing that? I hope that steps 1 to 3 will help you. And I'm going to show you why I think certain assets are better than others. The players in concern are there for the mid-price mids. And we're going to start with Gordon and Eze. I am not as bullish on both of them as most are. I'll start with Eze because I'm less bullish on him. I don't think the fixtures are as good as people say. I think going to Brentford, especially for a televised fixture, and I think this type of stuff makes a difference because you have a slightly different atmosphere. It's quite a small ground. I've been there myself. You can get a really good atmosphere going there. They're a side that traditionally can be very difficult to break down when they have quite a disciplined performance and they're well set up and the structure is solid. I imagine after a poor year last year, Thomas Frank would have worked a lot on that. So I am expecting an improvement there. And then you have West Ham, and then you have Chelsea. You have some talk about him potentially leaving. Where's his headspace at? He hasn't had the longest preseason compared to others. Palace probably won't have Mateta. They won't have Elise. It will be a slightly new dynamic. Brentford haven't got any worse. They've only got a bit better. West Ham have definitely got better. Chelsea have to have got better. So with all that in mind, and all the other brilliant options there, sure, he is brilliant when he's brilliant. And when he's good, he's better than most, as we saw towards the back end of last season. But I just don't think at 7 million, which is 0.5 more expensive than his competitors here, and 1.5 more expensive than the cheaper mids, who some of them look really good, I don't think you can justify it for those reasons. Maybe to say you can't justify it is a little bit harsh, but I certainly don't think you can see him in the same light as everyone else, including myself, was doing maybe 2-3 weeks ago. Moving on to Gordon, the only reason I say this is because I'm not sure if he's going to start game week 1. He is a guy who Eddie Howe's always put in the firing line. He plays a lot of minutes, so that's definitely something to note. But there is the potential with the fact that he hasn't had a long preseason compared to the likes of Barnes and others in the Newcastle side, that he misses game week 1. And if he does, that is by far his best fixture. He then goes away and his record away isn't nearly as good. So for me, it's really an expected minutes thing there. And if he does start, does he get hooked a bit early? Potentially. So that's one to monitor. The other thing is he's 7.5 million here. Is a little bit more expensive than most. And where funds are so tight this year, probably tighter than they've ever been, I would at least look and consider, if you've got him in your draft, potentially going for someone early doors that has slightly better minutes. So that's that. So those are two of the options that are very popular that I'm not as bullish on. So then from the rest, how do we assess who the best ones are? First and foremost, I just want to hone in on the fundamentals. No gut feelings, nothing of the sort, just pure hard evidence, right? How good are their expected minutes? What is their goal threat? Thus, what is their ceiling realistically? Yes, you can factor assist threat into that, but primarily we're looking at growth threat here and how good are their fixtures. And it's for that reason that I like Morgan Gibbs-White. Penalties, a central role, and I think proximity is becoming of increasing importance within FPL. Players who just generally are there in and around the box, assuming they have good fundamentals, will become good medium-term assets because there's always so much going for them that it's almost hard for them to dodge returns over the medium term. That's why I like someone like him. Great fixtures, penalties, central positioning, good overall technical quality. He just needs to ensure that he doesn't drop as much in as he has in the past because he's had to do a lot of legwork getting Forest up the pitch. I think he'll have to do less so this year. And given that, he now has the energy to essentially perform in the final third and generate output. I remember one specific instance where I carried the ball, and I did not play football to a good standard at all. I barely played. But I remember one specific instance where I carried the ball quite a long way, and I was so tired by the time I got towards the goal. The shot was awful. And obviously, he's a Premier League athlete, right? But still, he's playing against Premier League athletes as well. And I think just having to drive consistently really does lead to a decrease in output, given your physical capacity in the final third by the time. So if he doesn't have to do that, I can see it increasing at a rate which may surprise some people. That's why I'm probably a bit more bullish on him than most. I also like Nkunku. Similar to Gibbs-White, he'll play quite high, quite centrally. He's better. He's a phenomenal player who's probably still underrated by the English audience, just given the fact that they haven't seen as much of him and he's injured. The fixtures are decent from an attacking standpoint. I'm not in love with them. I have some queries about his expected minutes. Should João Felix sign? How is he managing his injury, really? Pre-season to the Premier League is completely different. The intensity level of the Premier League now is ridiculous. So overall, I'm still quite bullish, but I'm a little bit cautious. Right, Diogo Jota. I like him for game week 1, and he is listed here as a preference. But if you are to go for him, it really is a short-term punt for me, and I'd be looking to offload him within a few weeks maximum, which brings us to point 2. Can you afford to make that type of transfer, and can you afford to have that booked in? I think Nunes is going to become the 9 pretty soon. So realistically, I'm just looking to attack this fixture, which I'm finding a little difficult to interpret. I could see McKenna changing his system, and the fact that it's 12:30 away, newly promoted side, good atmosphere, ground will be bouncing. It becomes potentially a little difficult for Liverpool. But those are more non-footballing theories. From a more footballing standpoint, Liverpool look good pre-season. He looks good pre-season. He looks very sharp. He's a streaky player. He's one who certainly has a lot of avenues to goals, just given the fact he's good in the air, his finishing ability, the fact that he can just get into positions that others can't. He has a very, very good instinct in the box. So for all those reasons, I like him as a short-term pick. Personally, I don't think it's worth it when you take a broader perspective. However, for those really seeking the upside with him in Game Week 1, I think it's fine and certainly advantageous in a lot of aspects, whereby you probably won't get the same ceiling that he gives you in Game Week 1 and maybe 2, as opposed to pretty much all of the options here, right? Just given how I mentioned he's such a good finisher, streaky, and the good fixtures. Kudus is probably the one slipping under the radar for me. I think West Ham obviously have bolstered their attack massively. He's a top player, similar to Nkunku. There's so much quality there that I think regardless of the conditions around him, he'll always do well and be able to generate output. There's a lot of talk about him playing centrally with Somerville off the left and Bowen off the right. Even if Paqueta is to play in that central advanced 8/10 role, he'll still be in the side somehow, whether it be off the left, right, and Bowen up top, etc., etc. I don't see any problems with this expected minutes because I would say that in this West Ham side, maybe Paqueta aside, he's the best player, right? At least in terms of what looks to be the front four now, he's the best player. So I have no issues there. The fixtures, I think, are a little bit disguised. I don't think they're as bad as people say. Aston Villa with their high line, with their style of pressing, I think they always give you an opportunity, and that was reflected in their data last year. So with that in mind, I'm more than happy to have Kudus for game week 1. And then the fixtures after that, yeah, sure, they include City. With regards to the other fixtures, I've just got a gut feeling that Palace might concede a few more goals than other people are saying. But I don't really want to talk about that too much because it's a gut feeling. But overall, I'm really leaning on his quality when I suggest him as a pick. Rashford's there very loosely. I mean, I thought body language-wise, he looked a lot better. I think his confidence was definitely dampened towards the end of last season, through the entire of last season. But I think he looks better now. He looked like he had a bit more of a swagger in his step. I really wouldn't be surprised with a player of this quality if he thrives against the Fulham side. That give you a bit of space. A Brighton side, that certainly will give you some space in behind. And then you've obviously got Liverpool. I wouldn't be surprised if he does pretty well in those first three. But for me, you're taking gamble with the expected minutes, an early substitution. You're also taking gamble with the fact that maybe his finishing isn't quite as good in recent times as it would be if you were looking at him maybe 1 and a bit, 2 years ago. And with that in mind, can you access the ceiling? I'm not entirely sure, especially when United's dynamics, attacking dynamics, aren't currently optimized to any degree, right? You look at their build-up and they're not generating a huge volume of chances per game as a team. So with that in mind, yeah, sure, he's a preference, but similar to Kudus, I would say, there's definitely some type of risk. A different type of risk to Kudus, but some type of risk. Now, why haven't I gone for Martinelli in this list? Well, I like him. I'm just not sure he starts every single game, and I'm not sure how exactly the left-hand side dynamics of Arsenal will work out, and obviously Trossard as well. So I chose to avoid him for now. Bowen, I just don't think it's worth paying 1 million for him compared to Kudus. Diaz, I don't think this has the same goal threat as Jota. So if you're going to go for a Liverpool asset early doors, I would go Jota. Szoboszlai, I'm unsure of his role. So does he play a bit deeper? Does he play a bit more advanced? And when there's so many good options, why would I take the risk? Bailey, it's a gut feeling again. I'm just not sure, and I'm not sold on him entirely yet. I'm just not sure he can access his ceiling consistently, right? I've never seen him go through a prolonged period where he looks like a huge goal threat in particular. Sure, a huge threat on the pitch, but I'm talking about goal threat here. Lastly, why not Bryan Mbeumo? Well, I actually like him quite a bit, and of all the options that I've just mentioned, he might even be my favorite. We're really not sure what's going to happen with Tony to start the season, but regardless, he's always going to be part of a front two, front three, where he has a lot of responsibility in this Brentford side, given their lack of creativity from midfield, and given he has set piece taking responsibilities and genuine open play threat, both assist and goal threat. I think over a long term, he'll do well. It's just whether in the short term, others with slightly better fixtures can capitalize on those. So for me, that's the roundup of the mid-price mid. That is what I would say is far more complicated in comparison to the cheap mids that are 5.5 million less. I have quite clear views on all of them. Hudson-Odoi and Elanga, I'm not set on their expected minutes. I don't think they'll be anywhere close to 90. You've got Morgan Gibbs-White. Sure, he's a million more. But if you really want an inroads into the Forest attack, I would go him or Woods. Thus, for me, non-options. I think you have two good options and two very good options, whereby they offset all the other competition in the forms of Semenyo and Andreas. Hence why I haven't mentioned them here, well, in a positive light, and hence why I say this category is a little less complicated. We'll start with the very good options, and that being Smith Rowe and Minter, in my opinion. Smith Rowe's got great opening fixtures to start with. Sure, Man United away is not easy, but at least they'll give you a chance, right? There's like, even with their 4-2-4 press, one thing I noticed was the spaces between the lines are pretty big, and I imagine they potentially increase against a side like Fulham compared to Manchester City, given United become a bit more courageous off the ball and trying to win it higher up, given Fulham don't have the same technical quality as City to cut through them. One thing I also noticed was that Maino and Casemiro, when positioned there, whilst they had good games, there was a lot of space for them to cover. Now, Maino is obviously quite young, so as the game goes on, I think his legs retire, and Casemiro the opposite. He's obviously aging, and we saw last year that he had problems with his legs just being able to fill the space that needs to be filled, especially in this United side. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are some defensive issues there. I'm not quite sold on their press as much as maybe other people are. But with that in mind, I think it's a worst fixture in the world for ESR. And then obviously after that, it's two really good fixtures against promoted sides. And we'd probably assess from there. It's an international break as well. Nice time to reevaluate. You've obviously got quality here, right? You've got someone who seems to have a very good instinct of getting in the box. and being in the right position whereby he can receive the ball, good finishing, good ball striking at a variety of angles. And the other thing is I quite liked his positioning. When I watched his 45-minute performance, I watched the highlights of him in his first game. I didn't really agree with the analysis that he was getting into bad positions just generally. I thought it was very, very good, right? Like they weren't shipping him too wide. He played more advanced than Andreas from what I saw. And thus, I'm very, very comfortable picking him as of now. Minter, he obviously has worse fixtures, but I think talent-wise, he might be better than Smith Rowe, and I rate Smith Rowe highly because what I've seen of this guy, he looks brilliant. Scouting-wise, in terms of the reports I've seen online, very bullish. Had a brilliant preseason with Brighton, and sure, he doesn't have the best fixtures, but I think he might be the type of player that is somewhat fixture-proof if Brighton can get going. If you have a positive view of Brighton, their new manager, their new system, I don't see any issues in terms of how he's going to interact with that within the Premier League. I think individually he'll do very, very well. And if platformed correctly through the side, I have no issues. So that's why I say with these 5.5 mids, genuine goal threat, and that's the big thing. You're not just looking for the cheeky assist here and there and, maybe one clean sheet point. You're looking at assets with genuine goal threats. Somewhat similar to Palmer last year. Obviously not to the same extent, but I think that bodes very, very well for their prospects. The two good options are Bob and Rogers. I have a very similar view on both. I don't think long-term their minutes are going to be good enough, right, whereby you can keep them the whole season. But really, we just need to look at the short and medium term. Short term, upside there for sure. I think both will start game week 1. Both will get good minutes. I just don't like the fact that I think they're going to get subbed when they start regardless. Savio off the right. With regards to Rogers, maybe he comes off for Ramsey. Maybe McGinn moves into his role and he gets subbed off for someone else, etc., towards the end of the game. And it's for that reason I see the short-term upside because of the form they've been in preseason, their price, how they facilitate others in terms of FPL, and both, again, have genuine output threat. But in the medium term, I feel like I'm booking myself a transfer, and these are ones that could become quite frustrating. If I don't leave any money in the bank, I also don't have the best exit routes in terms of one free transfer. I'd have to use 2. And it's for that reason, I think paying the 0.5 extra, whereby Smith Rowe's minutes medium term will be a lot better than these two, and same with Minter, I feel far more comfortable with that. I would say we will return to Arsenal for the last time preseason, but I'm not sure I'm done banging their drum yet. We're going to look at the two North London sides here, Arsenal and Spurs. And the reason they have their own category is because I'm very bullish on both of them in terms of their FPL assets. Arsenal definitely in the league. As it stands right now, if I had to pick, I think I go Arsenal favourites to win the league. For me. Right, there's a lot to digest here. And we're going to be looking at the Arsenal attack because we've already looked at their defence. So 3 specific assets, Havertz, Odegaard, and Saka. You get expected minutes guarantees, right? There is no issue there. I think pretty much 85 minutes plus every game on average. Brilliant. Obviously, you'll get the odd sub at 60 or whatever. That'll be once in a blue. I spoke about this with Gabriel a bit, but I'm going to touch on it more now. Especially from an attacking standpoint, I think these fixtures are so underrated. Wolves at home, I think they could blow them away, right? There's so much quality in that side. The dynamics slightly more optimized just in general. Then you've got Brighton at home in game week 3, which again I like. If you look at the way Brighton plays, there's definitely the ability for Arsenal to employ some things that they will against Villa and Spurs in terms of transitions to hurt Brighton, because their line is still relatively high. They're still playing in quite a intense, front-footed, positive manner. And that bodes well for Havertz specifically and Saka because they are monsters on transition, right? So that's great. And then obviously you have Villa and Spurs. I think they're brilliant. Not even good. I think they could genuinely be brilliant. 2 sides that are going to give you space in behind. Brilliant. Saka, Havertz will exploit that all day long. 2 sides that are not only going to give you space in behind, but they're going to press you as well. You can cut through them. Look at the technical quality you've got from deep. If Odegaard drops deep, if Zinchenko is playing with his progressive passing from there, the carrying you have, the outlets you have, brilliant. I think overall, those 2 fixtures, severely underrated in terms of Arsenal's attack. Then looking at it from a more FPL perspective, ceilings-wise, both of them, all 3 of them have quite a high ceiling. Not quite a high, a very high ceiling, as they've displayed last season. And they've got very healthy floors. With Arsenal creating so many chances, with Havertz and Odegaard being centrally at all times, with Saka's, I guess, overall influence on the game, and how many actions, positive actions, attacking actions he completes, they will always have healthy floors, right? So the question becomes then, for me, which ones do we pick? How many do we pick? Not, should we get them? And that really comes down to the roles. Okay. I'm going for 2 because I'm going for Gabriel. And as you saw my team reveal yesterday, I had Havertz and Odegaard. In the time, I was slightly lent more towards Saka simply for the goal threat. I think with Havertz, what you're going to get is a guy who, when he plays at 9 against the big teams, is just going to be a massive goal threat anyway, because you have a 6'4", very complete player stationed in the middle, will be in the box a lot. I don't really think you can ask for much more, and that's putting it very, very simply. With Saka, one thing I mentioned previously and tweeted about is if you watch every action he completes, every single one is almost venomous. It has so much positive influence on that Arsenal side. And it's not just in terms of his creative actions, which I guess you would associate more with him, right? I think some people misinterpret him. He's a huge goal threat as well. You watch when he gets inside, ball striking is brilliant. He's so smart in the way he can manufacture shots and create new angles for himself. But I think I wouldn't really be too surprised if he increases on last year's goal tally. The other thing is he shared some penalties last year. Again, just a gut feeling. I don't think that happens as much this year. I don't really think Odegaard's going to get maybe as many as he did last year, if at all. They obviously gave one to Havertz to boost his confidence to start. I think Saka's just going to take all of them now, personally, unless Havertz is on a golden boot charge. But I don't think they'll go to Odegaard. The reason Odegaard even finds himself in the conversation is due to the fact that at 8.5, he comes in cheaper than Saka by 1.5, and he's always in those central zones. There are times where Saka gets stuck out wide just a little bit, whereas Odegaard, I've noticed, is always there in all forms, whether it be breaking down a low block, transitioning, just in a general mid-block game. Let's take Brighton, for example, right? He's always there in the central zone. He doesn't drift too much, and you'll find him at the edge of the box and playing off the 9 at times, or at least in close proximity. That's probably a better way to put it. At least in close proximity. And he's very fond of shooting from what I would say is mid-range. So all those things in mind, I think those 3 assets will do very well at the start of the season, and I just don't understand, for me, why you would fade Arsenal entirely. Sure, you may not have the same perspective as me and be as bullish, but I think you've got to have one of the Arsenal attackers. Moving on to Spurs, I've got 3 players that I really like, maybe 4. I think Van der Ven's a little underrated if you just fancy the fact that Leicester are porous defending set pieces and he has a decent opening 2 fixtures and he's 4-5. So if you want to take that aggressive route, there's a strategy there and something I have considered since yesterday. But the 3 assets I would like to look at, Porro, Solanke, Son. I mentioned earlier in the premium defenders why I like Porro. He comes in cheaper than all of them. And again, this is a short-term ploy, really, unless you can have cover for game week 4, which you can certainly do. For example, Barco at 4 million. It's just the fact that he's taking up a spot and you're not really meant to bench premiums in any week. But his open play goal threat is, I would argue, greater than Gvardiol's this year. I would argue it's greater than White's. I would argue it's greater than Trent's. I would argue it's potentially greater than anyone's. And if you get that at 5-5 with good opening fixtures, I would describe it as a fantastic market opportunity. And sure, his ownership is high in the game, but from the drafts I've seen on Twitter, which I guess is the more engaged user base that you guys are going to be competing against, he's not super popular. So I think there's definitely an opportunity there. And again, I mentioned Leicester pull from set pieces. He's the one who takes them. And just generally, the defense looks a little weak at the moment. I don't think they'll be able to sustain too much attacking threat against Tottenham, and for that reason, he'll probably have a little bit more of the ball in advanced areas, right? I just really, 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 really like having Son in my team. I feel so safe having Son in my team because I get one of the best finishers in the world. The other thing being Ange's system is so positive. For me, too positive. I don't think they need to concede as many chances as they do. He could lock it up a little bit more, but he's a Premier League manager and I'm not. But regardless, if we're looking at the facts, they're going to create a lot of chances. He'll have a lot of the ball. He'll have it in good spaces. Sure, he's going to play left wing this year, which I still prefer him at 9. But regardless, with good opening fixtures, I don't see anyone who could potentially match his ceiling. Like, he has a brilliant fixture against Leicester and a great record against them. And which other mids do I look at? Sure, like Bruno could do very well. But I don't look at him and think, oh, he has the same goal threat as Son. Granted, Son's more expensive, hence why I've had to make sacrifices elsewhere. But I'm comfortable doing that because I know that my reward could be huge. And at his ownership, I still think he's underrated, right? It doesn't matter what Spurs do in terms of the Premier League. What matters for FPL is that they'll create a lot of chances. He'll be on the end of a lot of them, and he has brilliant finishing and potentially penalties. So I don't think you can ask for too much more. Solanke is a potential game breaker, but there's 2 things for me to factor in before I can say he is a game breaker. One, his expected minutes. the system's so optimized for him, right? The system is so optimized for a 9, hence why Son did so well at times last year, that I think even if he has 75 minutes-ish on average with Richarlison subbing on, he's still a very good asset. But to be a game breaker, I would much prefer that he's essentially so good that Richarlison doesn't really get a look in. I don't think that'll happen, though, so I think you have to settle with maybe 75, 80. Who knows, maybe Son could be the one that comes off around 75, 80. He's obviously older, probably got less in the tank, so I wouldn't be surprised. But generally, mids are a little bit better than attackers for the fact that extra point for a goal, extra point for a clean sheet. So still feel more comfortable with him. That's one thing. And the second thing is penalties. But again, I don't think he's going to get them. So if you're willing, early doors, I would say, to be okay with 75-ish minutes, I still think you're going to get a guy who will have generated for him a lot of chances. And he scored a lot of goals last year, right? And if you can do that in a Bournemouth side, I imagine he will do well in the Spurs side. You just have to interpret the expected minutes in your own way. I would say they're middling, 75-ish. And if you're willing to have that, as opposed to maybe Havertz's 90, given that the system's more optimized for him than it is Havertz, it's good for Havertz. It's just being the 9 at Spurs is a real blessing. Then I think you can justify him. But if you're not happy with that, then I would probably leave it. But regardless, I think all of the assets I've mentioned now will do well. And that concludes the video, guys. Thank you very, very much. Please do subscribe as we approach 2,000 subscribers, and we hope to hit that prior to the season starting. Make sure to like the video, and again, drop your comments. I would love to have a discussion. I reply to all my comments pretty much that are somewhat nice. And if you do, I'd love to have a discussion on why you disagree on X, Y, and Z, and I'll be happy to talk it through. Again, you have Fantasy Football Hub right here. If you would actually like to beat your friends this year, take the initiative, sign up. The offer's so great. You'll get your money back if you don't win. It's 50% off anyway. The value for money is great. You're getting so much. Really take this opportunity because it expires very soon. I believe it expires in 3 days. So, yeah. Thank you very, very much. Make sure to subscribe, and I shall see you tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.